Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Jack Daly, Director of the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the National Air and Space Society Vice Admiral Donald D. Engen Flight Jacket Night. It's quite a title, as a matter of fact. Your membership in the Society plays an important role in the future of this museum, and I'm glad to report that this has been the best membership year in the Society's history. So you ought to give yourselves a hand on that. For the first time, we raised $1 million in membership alone. And that is, yeah, go ahead. You kind of heard that the theme tonight is the kickoff of the capital campaign, which will actually be announced tomorrow but start on Monday. And so to have reached this threshold is really significant for us at this point. You know that I always mentioned at these events that we couldn't have a program without a sponsorship. Well, now, tonight, you fill that bill. You're the sponsors for this event, and so we thank you very much for that. The Flight Jacket Night is an annual event that recognizes Don Engen, former director of the museum, and I'd like to thank the Engen family for all that they have done. The Engen, yeah, particularly. You know, actually, I have a new speechwriter. This is his first time out, and he's gotten 5 applauds, and we haven't even gotten off the first page. So it's a... where was I? The Engen legacy will forever live on in our programs, exhibitions, and activities. And as you've seen, the Smithsonian is embarking on an institution-wide capital campaign for the first time in our 168-year history. The National Air and Space Museum's share of the $1.5 billion institution goal is $120 million. And we get to keep all of that money to put back into the museum and refurbishing our exhibits and our programs. So this is a recognition on the part of the Smithsonian that our federal support is not going to ever get any bigger, and if we're going to do the things that we want to do in the future, we have to make up that difference, and that's what the whole purpose of this campaign is. So we're really excited about it. As I said, it kicks off on Monday, but I'm pleased to announce that we're off to a good start. But we need your help. And the other thing that's not just coincidental is that our speaker tonight is the chairman of our campaign. So it's nice the way the whole thing comes together. Captain Jim Lovell is an Eagle Scout and graduate of the United States Naval Academy. He became a naval aviator, a test pilot, and then joined NASA with the second group of astronauts in 1962. He set new spaceflight endurance records and performed the first orbital rendezvous on his first spaceflight, Gemini 7. As commander of Gemini 12, he closed out the Gemini program by proving that safe extravehicular activity were possible, paving the way for the Apollo program. His next flight, Apollo 11, was humanity's first voyage to the moon. En route, he established celestial navigation techniques to steer America to the moon and confirmed the existence of Santa Claus. In regard to that navigational, in the time and navigation exhibit that we have the story of Jim Lovell, Navigator, getting them to the moon and the equipment that he was using. So if you're interested, it'd be a great place to check. The Apollo 13 made him the first person to travel into space 4 times. On that remarkable flight, Captain Lovell and his crew traveled further from Earth than any humans before or since. We were lucky to get him back from that mission, and I'm glad to welcome him here tonight, standing in for Tom Hanks. Please welcome Captain Jim Lovell.
I thought that was going to happen. Thanks, Jack, for that very kind introduction, and I'm very proud to be the chairman of the Capitol campaign. Hope we do a very good job. And I'm glad to be here at the Flight Jacket Talk. You see, I dug out this old flight jacket that I had in the closet for years, and I just about got it on again, so here I am. Perhaps by this time, you're all aerospace enthusiasts and are really familiar with the 4 flights that I flew, and Jack mentioned some of them. But I thought I'd quickly go over some of the little incidents at each one of those flights to start out. The Gemini 7 flight was a 2-week mission with Frank Borman because the doctors thought that humans couldn't stay in 0 gravity for 2 weeks because we had evolved under the Earth's influence of gravity, and so isn't there something in the body that is related to gravity that keeps us alive? Well, it turned out that that was not true, and we lived the 2 weeks, and now we have astronauts normally living 6 months or longer in the space station. And as Jack mentioned, the one other thing about 7 was that first rendezvous with Gemini 6. We were the target. Gemini 6 was supposed to have rendezvous with an unmanned vehicle ahead of time, but it didn't make it, and so we were there just for their use. Apollo 8, of course, was that 3rd mission, and it was supposed to be an Earth orbital mission. We are going to take a lunar module up with a command service module and test it all out in 1968. 2 things happened in the summer of 1968 that changed that. One, we had found out that we had intelligence information that the Soviets were going to put a man around the moon in the late fall of 1968. And they were very serious, by the way, at this time. And the second thing that happened was that the lunar module was not ready for a flight in 1968. So they made some very bold decisions here at Washington, NASA. They said if Apollo 7 is successful in its 11-day orbit, then we will change the mission of Apollo 8, put it on Saturn V, and send it to the moon. This would be the first time, or only the 3rd flight of a Saturn mission, and it will be manned. And it was, of course, a very successful flight. And I think later on in my talk, I'm going to mention about that flight in more detail. My last flight, of course, Apollo 13. You've all probably seen the movie or read the book, or it's on TV still to this day. It was a classic case of crisis management. A case where good leadership, not just at the top of the organization, but throughout the organization, and that leadership fostered teamwork. And teamwork is the glue that holds any project or organization or company to be successful. And then there was initiative, thinking outside the box, looking at things that go wrong and had people that can find solutions to them. Perseverance and motivation, all these attributes turned an almost complete catastrophe into a successful recovery. Now those was essentially the history of my space flight. But tonight, I'm going to turn back the clock and relate to you how a poor boy from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, finally found himself to go to the moon. I was born in 1928. My father died when I was very young. My mother served as a secretary, and we lived in just a little 1-room apartment. But it was in the 30s that, of course, that all boys at that age, knew about airplanes. Lindbergh went around and crossed the ocean in 1927. He was the hero of many of us. I built airplanes. I tried to fly the models with the rubber bands. I was really excited about airplanes. And I had another incentive, too. My uncle graduated from the Academy, Naval Academy, 1913. He became the 58th Naval Aviator. And when he visited us every once in a while, he'd tell us about the nice stories about landing on the old carriers, the old Lexington, the Saratoga. And so as I approached high school, that's what I was going to do. I'm going to be a pilot. I'm going to be an aviator. I got to high school, and about a year or so into high school, I got really a different perspective. I found a new interest, and I can't really tell you what it was, but I think I got a hold of a pamphlet called Method of Reaching Extreme Altitudes. And it was written by a Professor Robert Goddard. Now, I couldn't analyze most of it. Most of it was Greek to me at the time, but for some reason, I got interested in rockets. Liked rockets, read about what Robert Goddard was doing in his research. Found out that he made the first liquid fuel rocket way back in 1926, fired it one night and roused everybody up. In fact, a model of that rocket is in the museum today. Finally, he transferred his research down to Roswell, New Mexico, and was funded by the Guggenheim Foundation, and Charles Lindbergh really helped him out at that too. So as my high school days went on, I learned more about it. I read a good book by Willy Ley, who was a German-American, and he told all the stories about the new German rocket society that was going up in the 30s. He mentioned a very young, talented man by the name of von Braun, Werner von Braun, part of that society. And so there was no doubt about it. You know, I was going to be a rocket engineer. I wrote to the American Rocket Society. I said, can you give me some advice? How can I become a rocket engineer? I got a very nice letter back. They said, well, none of the colleges have that as a major yet, but if you take thermodynamics and mechanics and mathematics, I'm sure you'll get into a position to follow rocket engineering of some sort. Oh, and by the way, go to MIT or go to Caltech to get a good education. Well, you know, I was thinking above my head anyway. I didn't have money to go to college, and that the avenue seemed to be blocked for me now. But in high school, I did hedge my bets. I applied to the Naval Academy to see if I get an appointment to the Naval Academy. Did all the work, and when I got back a return response finally from the Academy, I found out I was the third alternate, which meant that the principal and two other guys had to either not want to go or build something before I could go. At that point, as graduation was approaching in high school, I felt really depressed. The two things that I really wanted to follow later on in life, the door is blocked. And then, you know, maybe in everyone's life, something happens. You have no control over it. You don't plan for it ahead of time. Sometimes a door just opens up. And that door turned out to be a naval recruiting officer. He had come to talk to the students, the graduating class at my high school, and he said the Navy found out that after World War II, more of their naval aviators left the service to go into civilian life, and they suddenly found themselves lacking naval aviators. And so an Admiral Holloway at BUPERS, Bureau of Personnel, devised a plan to take qualified high school seniors, people that want to, that passed a physical, passed the other tests, and the Navy will send you as an apprentice seaman in active reserve. You join the Navy, apprentice seaman in active reserve, to any engineering college that you wanted to go, as long as you took up an engineering degree. And when you finished 2 years, only 2 years, we'd send you down to Pensacola, swear you in as an aviation midshipman, have you go through flight training, and when you finally get your wings at the end of that time, We'll send you to a squadron, get you out to sea, and after about 6 or 8 months after that, as midshipman, if everything worked right, we'll promote you to an ensign and send you back to your last 2 years of college. That was a godsend. I couldn't believe my ears. Naturally, I joined right away, sworn in as apprentice seaman in active reserve. Went to the University of Wisconsin under a mechanical engineering course. While I was there, though, in the 2 years, my mother called up, and she always wanted me to get my education to make sure I got it. She said, would you please apply to the academy one more time? So I did. And when the results came back, I was now first alternate. And I figured that's the end of that deal. But anyway, here I am. I got 2 years of college. I finished it, of course, in a year and a half. The Navy did not believe in vacations. I was sent down to Pensacola. When I got down there, I was sworn in as an aviation midshipman and started my flight training. The first thing we did was ground training, and so I was halfway through the course when I suddenly got orders from the Navy. You've been accepted to the Naval Academy. Report to Annapolis as soon as possible. I was at a conundrum. I got this. Some young Marine officers just back from the war pulled me aside and said, Lovell, you don't want to accept that. You already have 2 years of college. You're in naval aviation already. You'll be 2 years ahead of those people. And I said, you're absolutely right. And then I got a call from the skipper of the ground school. He was an old captain that I think has been training aviators since the Revolution. And he pulled me aside. He said, sit down, son. He said, you want to make the Navy your career? Yes, sir. Then get your ass up to the Naval Academy and get your education while you can. And so the next day, my bags were packed. I went up to the academy, checked into the missions officer, walked in, and the mission guy looked at me because I'm in my midshipman uniform. And he said, what are you doing in that uniform? I'm an aviation midshipman. He said, you can't be a midshipman. Only midshipmen are here at the Naval Academy. They had never gotten the word about the Holloway program. They called up the Bureau personnel and said, what's the story on this? And they told them the story. And so I was honorably discharged as an aviation midshipman to be sworn in the next day as a Naval Academy midshipman. It was about 2 years had gone by as training at the Naval Academy, and when about 2 years went by, something very special happened to the country. The Korean War started. When the war started, my contemporaries down at Pensacola that I had left got their wings, went out to sea as aviation midshipmen, were flying there when the war started, and they were the first midshipmen in combat since the Civil War. And a lot of them never got their last 2 years of college. My last year at the Naval Academy, still very much interested in rockets, I was required to write a term paper. Most of the mids wrote term papers on some aspect of the Navy, but I wrote my term paper on the development of the liquid fuel rocket engine. And I can still remember that last paragraph or so in my term paper, and I said, someday men will use rocket power to go into space. And little did I realize that just 10 years later, that actually occurred with Yuri Gagarin. But when I graduated, was sent right back to flight training, flew those early SNJs, if you remember that. Then for advanced training, I got into the grand and glorious Hellcat, flew all that. And then we had some transition training, and I finally got my wings in March of 1954. And I got a letter from the Navy, a very nice letter. It said, what coast would you like to be assigned to? And once you're assigned to that coast, what what Naval Air Station would you like to go to? Now, I thought that was really great. They're asking me what coast I wanted to go to, what Naval Air Station I wanted to go to. And of course, I was from Milwaukee, so I didn't know much about the East or the West. But I said, I want to go to Patuxent River, Maryland. Not Patuxent River, Maryland. I wanted to go to Quonset Point, Rhode Island. That's what I wanted to go to, Quonset Point, Rhode Island. Sure enough, a little while later, I got my orders, Moffett Field, California. I finally found out how the Navy really worked. I reported to a squadron called Composite Squadron 3. And when I walked in, I couldn't believe it. There was assigned to this squadron 122 naval aviators, 800 enlisted in this squadron. And then I found out that this squadron trained night fighter teams for the various carriers. Now, this was early '55. Night flying off of aircraft carriers was not a thing as it is today. Very seldom do you fly off at night unless you had to, like in World War II, to get some of the planes back or some very special operations. But with the Korean War, they found out that they needed teams to night combat air patrols or long-range stuff. So they would get a 4-plane team, 5 pilots, and put them on a carrier for jets, and the same thing for props. I went to the skipper when I first got aboard. I said, "Did you see, I just got my wings." I said, "Don't you put second tour pilots into these teams for night flight, night training?" He says, "Well, we're trying rookies now." I was assigned to Team JIG, 4-plane team flying F-2H-3 Banshees. 5 of us, a team skipper and 4 others, and we were assigned to the Shangri-La. We ended up doing a lot of our night carrier landing training off the friendly coast of San Diego, and where if you kind of got, missed something or you ran out of fuel when trying to get on board, you had a friendly airport. And we deployed around October 1955 to the Western Pacific. Didn't do hardly much flying, no night flying at all after that training. Finally got on station off Japan in February of 1966. And I can recall quite vividly, on 3 February, the task force commander said, "I want a combat air patrol at night." And so Team JIG was deployed, 4 of us. The procedure was pretty simple. I was going to take off first in my Banshee, go up about 2 or 3 minutes, make a 180. At the same time, the other 3 airplanes would be taken off. And as I came back down towards the ship again, they'd all come in and rendezvous with me. And then we'd break up in teams of 2, and we'd go up and do our combat air patrol. But as the 3rd airplane took off, they kept the 4th plane on board. We finally got a call that the weather was coming down pretty bad. We decided to cancel the operation, just stay around the carrier, burn down that fuel, and when you get to landing weight, we'll bring you aboard. So I'm already coming back to the carrier, and I had what it was called an ADF, automatic direction finder. And it was pointed directly to the carrier. I had it on the carrier's frequency, and that was my goal, because the carrier was in sort of combat mode and no lights on it at all. And I was waiting for my other 2 companions to join up on me. And time went on for longer than I thought. And I kept going towards the carrier. ADFs pointed directly towards it, but my companions didn't join. So I called them. I said, "Where are you?" And they said, "Well, the 3 is rendezvous with 2, but we can't find you. We're circling the carrier, burning down fuel." And then I thought to myself, why am I going still strictly at the carrier? Unbeknownst to me, the frequency on a station in Opama, Japan was the same as the frequency of the carrier. Well, my 2 companions had locked onto the ship. I locked on to Opama, Japan, and I was heading for Japan. At 1,500 feet, that's the way we did it in those days, which was really ridiculous. And then I thought to myself, well, wait a second, maybe I dialed in the wrong frequency on my ADF. Now I had an E-pad, and I had written on the E-pad the frequency that I should have for the system. And I'd also improved this E-pad so I could see it at night. I had mounted a light that I made special, and I had a little cord, and all I had to do was reach over and plug the cord into the plane's side receptacle, the electrical conduit, and I'd have a light and I could see if I had the right frequency. I reached down, got the cord, plugged it in, and zap. Every single cockpit light went out. I was in complete darkness. My mouth, or my heart went up to my mouth, my throat got dry. I had a pen light in my suit. I brought it out, turned it on, took off the mask, and put the pen light in my mouth, and I'm looking at it, but it could only shine on one instrument at a time. Altitude, airspeed, direction. And I'm thinking, oh my God, what can I do? No lights. I said, well, I guess I could call the ship. First of all, I called them and said, are you painting me? Do you have me on radar? And of course, I forgot at that time, but their radar was down there in maintenance. And they said negative. And then I thought, well, I can call the ship to have them turn on all the lights, and maybe I can go back and find the ship. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'd be the laughing stock of the Navy. And they said, well, maybe I can go to Japan and maybe find an airfield, just say that I was lost and got an airfield. No. So I made a 180-degree turn, and I said, I'm going to try to find the ship somehow. Came around and got on the course, which I thought was somewhat back to the ship. And briefly, I turned the light off to see if I could see a horizon, but there was no horizon. But with all the darkness, my eyes got adapted, and I suddenly looked ahead of me on the water, a streak, a long trail, a luminous trail. And I realized that that trail was from a ship's screws churning up the algae in the water, leaving the luminescence of the algae show on the surface. And so I thought I'd better follow it. I did. I finally saw just the shadow of the ship as I came up on it, and above them, my two companions were circling with their running lights on. I joined them. And now we were a three-man formation, and I was the third man. We came around the ship on the starboard side, coming in for our landing. And as we passed the bow of the ship, one by one, my companions peeled off to go to the port side and go aft to make their final landing. And suddenly, when the second plane left, I was in the dark again. I put up the pen light, and I looked at the altimeter, and I started my turn and tried to go back and forth. I got where I was going down the port side of the ship, thinking that now I think I pretty got it made. I finally could see the LSO. He had a lighted suit on this time. This is the old way we did it. And I got to the fantail to start my turn, and I looked down, and I saw a light down below me. And I thought, you know, the plane guard destroyer can't be this close. And then I realized it was a reflection of my red light, wing light, off the water. And I quickly looked at the altimeter, the radar altimeter, and it was at 20 feet going down. Scared me half to death. Full throttles up again, up around the ship one more time, coming in at 500 feet this time, with a long straight in to come in for the landing, and the LSO kept going like this, wanted me to get down and down, and I figured I'd much rather be too far up than too far down. I finally crashed on the ship, blew both tires, my tail hook caught the last cable, and I came to a screeching halt, climbed down with wobbly legs, started my way down to the ready room. The flight surgeon saw me. He says, we saw what was going on. He said, you don't look too good. Have this. And he gave me one of those little bottles of brandy. I drank it in one gulp. Got down to the ready room. The skipper was there. And he said, Lovell, you fell off the horse tonight. You're going to get right back on. and he signed me up the next night for the next night flight. And that's how I got started. I did make 107 landings on that ship and on the cruise, and when I came back to the squadron, it changed completely. It was no longer training night fighter teams, but it was assigned to train new squadrons on all the new airplanes that the Navy was getting. The Crusader, the Demon, the F-4D, the Skyray, the Skyhawk, the Fury. Suddenly I found myself in glory. I was able to fly all these airplanes, and I was training on the people on the Demon. And when my tour was finished, I thought, well, since I've flown all these different types of airplanes, I'd like to go to test pilot school. So I applied, and I got accepted in class 20. Went down there. By this time, I had 3 children, and test pilot school was only 6 months, and they tried to jam everything possible into 6 months. It was so hard to study that it was like taking a drink of water from a fire hydrant. And finally, I got one of the small closets. We lived in an 800 square foot apartment on the base, and I got one of the small closets, and I built a plywood table in there. And I got one of those helicopter helmets that, that take out all the sound. And I closed the door, put the helmet on, and I did my study in there. I did it for 6 months in that little closet. Fortunately, I did become #1 in the class, and the #1 always gets this choice of one of the 4 test centers or test divisions: flight tests, service tests, armament tests, and electronics tests. Everybody wants flight tests because that's what you do, what you just got finished studying. Service test was pretty good too, to test out the airplanes. Armament test, of course, test all the armament that they had. And all electronics tests did was go out and circle small towns and check radars and communications. And so everybody wanted flight tests. And since I stood #1, I said, that's what I want. And they said, we changed the plans now, you're in electronics test. About the time I reported electronics tests, things up here in Washington changed. The National Advisory Committee on Aeronautics changed to the National Aircraft and Space Administration, NASA. They were thinking about, and the rumor had come around, about sending someone up into space in a tin can or in a capsule on a big booster. As a matter of fact, they were very serious. I know now that they're looking at what kind of an individual do they want. There were some people that said, look, let's get people that are double amputees. They don't need their legs in this small capsule, and we can save an awful lot of weight. Another group said, no, let's get some of those Hollywood stuntmen. They're used to taking these wild chances. Let's get them. But it was President Eisenhower that suggested to NASA to get military test pilots. They're used to testing new vehicles, and also they had security clearances, and some of the stuff was still classified. So NASA sent out a notice to both the Air Force and the Navy saying, please give us a list of the people who have the following criteria. Can't be over 35, can't be over 6 feet, have to have an engineering degree, have to be a graduate of a test pilot school, and have to have 1,000 hours of jet flying. Well, the Air Force and the Navy came up with 110 candidates. And then when the first 40 came to NASA, they decided to test them out. And so they asked the military to send orders to each one of these first 40 to go to a interview and actually a conference in Washington. And I was one of them. I got this orders that said, report to the Dolly Madison House for special operations. And I thought that was a strange set of orders. Dolly Madison House for special operations? So I went, and as I drove out of Patuxent River, just 60 miles south of here. I saw a couple of my old schoolmates, Pete Conrad, Wally Schirra, all going in the same direction. We got up there, of course, got the briefing. They were going to put this Mercury capsule. They're going to use an Atlas ICBM. And at the time they were making this announcement, Atlases were blowing up every other day down in Florida. And you know, we were going to put them up in orbit. Well, after the briefing, we got together. And we said to ourselves, we tried to talk each of us in the fact that this is a really bum operation. I mean, if we join this thing might be underfunded in 2 years. We get sidetracked from our normal naval, you know, careers, going to squadron commander, to all that. No, we don't want any of it. But actually, we are all trying to persuade someone else to not join. It ended up that 32 people went for the second phase, the Lovell Clinic in Albuquerque, New Mexico, for this week-long examination. But this group at Lovelace knew that they had some guinea pigs, that they were going into an environment that has never been gone into before, and they were doing tests that were not even known by most of the medical community. It took a whole week, and when the tests were all finally done, I was the only guy to flunk. Of all the guys, I guess they had to flunk somebody. I had a high bilirubin. Now, what that is, I found out later on, was pink pigment in your blood caused by either malaria, hepatitis, or yellow jaundice. I never had malaria, never had hepatitis, so it might have been yellow jaundice, don't know. Anyway, I flunked, went back to the test center, got to be program manager of the F-4 Phantom because electronics tests changed into weapons tests, and I had a good job there. Watched the original 7 be introduced on TV. And then I went to Oceana to be an instructor in the F-4. When suddenly, not too long after I was there, I got a call from BUPERS. Lovell, would you like to, are you still interested in the space program? The Navy never knew that I flunked the medical, and I never told them, of course. And I said, well, sure. So again, I got some orders, and this time I went for a physical in San Antonio to the Brooks Medical Facility, and they don't even care about bilirubin. And I passed, and I got into the second group of astronauts, the Gemini group, and that, of course, is the rest of the story there. I do want to take a little time just to mention Apollo 8. Apollo 8 was, I think, it was the highlight of my career, and I think it was one of the highlights of our space operations. Because if you remember, for those of you who are old enough, remember 1968. The Vietnam War was going on. There were 2 assassinations. There were riots in the streets. The Democratic Convention had riots there. All the young people knew the war was a mistake. And yet at the last bit, in the last part of December, we launched something that everybody in this country could be proud of. 3 men going 240,000 miles all the way to the moon. I was proud to be the navigator of that thing. When we got there, we looked around the moon and we saw the far side for the very first time that anybody could see it live. And then we looked back, and my greatest impression was looking back here at the Earth. Just a small ball, blue and white, like a Christmas tree ball, hung in an absolutely black sky. I could put my thumb up and completely hide the Earth. Everything I knew was behind my thumb. It just disappeared. I looked again, and I could see that it was In fact, it didn't look like there was anybody there. It looked completely uninhabited. But I did know that there was about 5 or more than 5 billion astronauts all on this spaceship Earth. And we were so fortunate to be here because this planet has the proper size to have the gravity to contain water in an atmosphere. At the same time, it's at the proper distance from the sun to provide energy, and yet not too close or not too far to cause life to be evolved here. I remember it very vividly, seeing the Earth for that time. Anders, of course, took that famous picture that you saw, and I think that was really one of the greatest attributes that our greatest accomplishments that our space program has done. I was Neil Armstrong's back up in 11, and when everything was going on and I was no longer needed, I escorted Charles Lindbergh out to the launch site the day of the launch of 11. And I looked at the spacecraft and the booster, and then I looked up at him and I said, you know, this is a very auspicious day. They're going to land on the moon. And Lindbergh looked at me and his eyes were kind of misting over, and I think he was thinking about the long 33-hour flight all the way across the ocean on that very first flight of him and reaching for Paris. And then he looked at me and he said, you know, that 240,000-mile first flight to reach the moon, that's the flight that I'll remember. Let me just conclude my remarks by quoting Soliloquy, and you've probably all seen it. It was actually Tom Hanks on the very last section of the movie, the last frames. He was walking off the carrier deck and he was saying to himself, and it was sort of in the thing that he was thinking of the future of himself. And he said, I sometimes catch myself looking up at the moon, remembering the changes in fortune in our long voyage, thinking of the thousands of people who worked to bring the three of us home. I look up at the moon and wonder, when will we be going back? And who will that be? When will we be going back? And who will that be? It has been 42 years since we last visited the moon with no plans to go back. Thank you.
We've got time for questions now. Anybody have one? Yes, right here, please. There, you got a couple old guys down here, so speak up, please, because between us, we're going to try to hear what the question is.
Apollo 13, by Apollo 13, you were pretty much a veteran on the Saturn V. But can you describe liftoff, what that feeling was like on Apollo 8?
Says by Apollo 13, you were pretty much a veteran on the Saturn V. Could you describe what it was like on the liftoff with Apollo 8?
Yes, we actually call the Saturn V the old man's rocket. The Gemini was a lot stronger, but there's two sides to it. If you're out there at the launch site and you're watching this thing going, and you have a moderator, a PR guy saying, now they're doing this, and now they're doing that, and then we switched on to here, and then we're that, and then it's, you know, the countdown keeps going down. In the spacecraft, you're just sitting there. You don't hear all the verbiage, you don't hear everything. Pretty soon, the launch director will say, now, minute to go, or something like that. And then as you come down, you get the countdown, and about 5 or 6 seconds before the engines unite, you hear the rumbling. The valves have opened up. The fuel is rumbling down, coming down towards the engine. And suddenly you hear the engines go, and a really shaking and noise. However, it's a smooth takeoff. If you've seen liftoffs of the Saturns, they are very slow, and they maneuver over to get to the proper point. They move over to get away from the gantry to begin with, and then they program themselves out. If you're watching it from the site and you're 3.5 miles away, you'll see a series of sharp bangs, and you'll feel the pressure in your stomach as the pressure wave comes over. The first stage on the Saturn V, and we're burning about 15 tons of fuel per second, we're going up, and we build up to 4 Gs, 4 times your own weight, and suddenly we jettison it, light the 5 engines on the second stage first, and then the 1 engine on the 3rd stage. But they're all programmed actually to give you less than 1 G on the Saturn V. So it's an old man's rocket as compared to the Gemini, which when the 2nd stage burned out, suddenly you went from 8 Gs to 0. You knew you were in for a ride.
Okay, right here in front.
Sorry. I was wondering what it felt like in re-entry with the free fall feeling.
What did it feel like?
We got a couple old guys here.
What did it feel like during re-entry when you came back?
Oh, what did it feel like during re-entry? Coming back from the moon is different than the Earth orbital types because you're coming in at a faster than a circular speed. You're coming in not quite 25,000 miles an hour, maybe 24,000 on a long elliptical orbit right from the moon. And when you get right down to the atmosphere, that's when you're doing your max speed. And so the spacecraft, when you're just nothing in the command module now, has to fly in and dip down and then build itself back up again and then go in for the final landing. The command module is a lifting body, and the computer has control of it, and it knows where we are all the way down, and it knows where we want to go. If we're overshooting the target, the command module rotates around to put the lift vector down to shorten it. If we're too far left or too far right, the command module rotates right or left to bring the lift vector over each way. Maximum Gs in that initial pullover before we start going back up again, about 6 Gs. And then pull over, and then you start to get down, it comes in about 3 Gs, and then it bleeds down to 1 G finally. So it's not a bad ride. Although when we trained, because we weren't too sure, see, we have to go inside a 2-degree pie-shaped wedge to make a safe landing. We weren't too sure how many Gs. We actually, because Frank and Bill and I were on Apollo 8, the very first one, we rode the centrifuge up to about 18 to 20 Gs. Of course, we're pulling it this way, not down this way. And I never want to do that again.
I want to ask a question here because I want to make sure that we talk about it tonight. We mentioned that you set endurance records early in the program, and Gemini was the place where 2 weeks you and Frank Borman were strapped into that Gemini capsule. I've heard that when you were landed back on the carrier deck that you announced your engagement.
Yeah, it got to be kind of close, I have to tell you that. He lost his toothbrush, so we used the same toothbrush. And of course, I have to tell you an interesting story. It's a 2-week mission. And so before the flight, we, for 2 weeks, we were monitoring what we ate and what we gave up, and to make sure. And then during the flight, they knew exactly the food on board, and we saved all the food, and the urine was programmed through a system that they could tell how much urine we had expended. And then on the way back again, we was 10 days, they looked at us. But we're on the flight now, and this is a 2-week mission. And of course, most of our food before the flight was very high residue. And finally, Frank looks at me, says, "Jim, this is it." I said, "Frank, you have only 4 more days to go." And he says, "No, I gotta go now." We had a bag about like this, and it was open bag, and had a lip at the top, and on that lip was glue. And then, of course, much like these tags when you go, "My name is so-and-so," you pull off the wax and put it on there. And this bag went down here. Halfway down the bag, there was an entry for a finger that would go in there. And then on the outside of the bag was a little pouch for a piece of toilet paper and a little other plastic bag with disinfectant on it. And the idea was, of course, to use it. And I found out that position is everything in life. And finally, the measure of a good companion is when you're finished, you put it together and put the disinfectant in and say, you know, "Frank, would you mix this up again, because we want to make sure we didn't get the stuff." The disinfectant was used so no gases were going to blow up and all that kind of stuff. But fortunately, I think the shuttle did a lot better job.
Yeah, if you want to try that, go out and sit in a Volkswagen strapped in for 14 days, right? Yes, go ahead.
Well, at the time of the explosion, I wasn't really too sure how serious it was.
Let me get the question.
Oh, okay.
During Apollo 13, you had periods of anxiety, and when was it that you started to get the feel that maybe you're going to make it?
Well, when the explosion first occurred, we didn't know exactly how serious it was until I looked out the window and saw the gas escaping, which was oxygen coming out of the command module. Then I realized the sequence of events that we would soon be out of oxygen, out of electrical power, and couldn't use the propulsion system. So I figured about that time, because we hadn't yet figured out how to get out of this, we had a 10% chance. By the time the ground finally figured out that it was not just a communication problem that they were looking at on their consoles, but a real problem, Hayes and I had already gone into the lunar module and started to figure out how to use it as a lifeboat some way, somehow to get home. And by that time, I kind of figured that we had a 10% chance to get home. And then as things went on, as we figured out how to get rid of the carbon dioxide that was building up, how to get back on the proper course so we wouldn't miss the Earth on the way back again, and how to, turn off the electrical power to save it for the final plunge, our percentages slowly went up all the way. And when the spacecraft hit the water and didn't keep sinking, we were 100% sure.
All right. Yes, go ahead.
Did you hear all that?
Well, yeah, I think the context of the Apollo program as it juxtaposed against the other things that were going on in the country at that time.
Well, yes, and in that period of time, those of you who have been through that sequence, of course, there was a lot of controversy in that country, and yet the people were all for the program. We were at a contest with the Russians. It was one of prestige more than anything else. They were ahead of us, beginning in the Mercury program. They had already put people in space. And so it was one of a contest. But as time went on, we got more and more efficient, and we finally overtook the Russians. And it was, like I said, the one positive program in the country that really excited everybody and kept a lot of people off the mind of the war. So in that aspect, I think we got a lot of telegrams back about, how happy we saw them. We saw Apollo 8 go around the moon at that particular time.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you comment on how you deal with adversity? You just told us tonight about not getting into Annapolis, not getting into the Mercury program, having a 10% chance in Apollo 13. How do you deal with those situations, and how do you confront them?
Yeah, how do you deal with adversity?
That's a good question, especially for a lot of the young people who might get discouraged right away. You have to have a positive attitude. I think attitude is perhaps one of the best attributes that a person can have, more so than anything else. If you go through life with a positive attitude and say, gosh, I didn't make it, now maybe I'll try again, or I'll keep on going, I'll keep on doing something. And that's what kept me going. I didn't know that I was going to get a call to get back in the space program. I didn't know that something happened to the principal the second time I applied for the Naval Academy. All these things came up. I think if you really have a positive attitude and keep charging forward, things will come to you. Like that recruiting officer who talked to the class and said about, hey, they need naval aviators. That was a complete, out of the blue. I couldn't believe it. I had no future until that guy talked to me.
Okay, yes, right here.
Where do you think this nation ought to be focused in the future in terms of space exploration? Should we be looking at a base on the moon? Should we be looking at Mars exploration? Where should we be going?
Where should the country be focusing our space program in the future? Should we have a base station on the moon, or where should we be going?
Well, I'll give you my opinion. There's lots of different opinions on how we should go in the space program. I fully believe, number one, that the space program is a positive to the country. Provides a spirit education. It supplies a spirit of education to the young people who look at it. It's like a catalyst to get a good education. It also it provides increased new technology that we have, and some basic science that comes through our space activities. And it's also very cooperative now. Remember the big the space war between the Russians? Now we're all together essentially, except just recently. But I mean, essentially we're still in our space activities. We're pretty much together. So. I think that we should continue the program. I'm very sorry that Constellation was canceled. It was canceled not because the Congress approved it in 2005 and 2008, but they never funded. I found out there's two things to Congress. You approve something, and that's easy. You fund it, that's hard. And it was not sustainable. But Constellation was going to provide Earth orbit, low Earth orbit to the International Space Station. Nowadays, I think that can be done by commercial. Commercial people, SpaceX or the Boeing commercial aspect, can provide astronauts to the space station, return them, things like that. I think we should concentrate to go back to the moon. I think we should concentrate to go back to the moon, and so we get very comfortable going to the moon. So we get the technology where it's very reliable, and we start learning more about the early aspects of landing for longer times. And with that technology behind us, we can then expand to look at how we go to the moon. It's not going to be easy. There might be things we don't know about, like radiation might be very difficult. But eventually, and there's no timeline to this thing, but essentially slowly work your way up to actually going to Mars. That's the way I view it.
Okay, go ahead.
Captain Lovell, could you say a few words about deep sleep? Do you think that your relationship being in Wisconsin helped you get the first forward flight program?
What did he say?
What with
What about Wisconsin?
Do you think your Wisconsin connection helped Deep Slate and select you
Oh.
get on 4 flights.
Did your
Oh.
Wisconsin connection help you with
no.
Deke Slayton? Is that, was
No,
that
you
the
got to
question?
remember that Deke Slayton was Air Force. I was Navy, so I did have Apollo 14, though, as you might know. I was assigned Apollo 14, and Al Shepard was assigned to Apollo 13, but he was grounded for about 9 years with a deer problem. And suddenly, when he got ungrounded, Slayton gave him 13. And then a few days later, the hierarchy up here in Washington said he hasn't had enough training, get somebody else. And so since I had 14, they moved me down to 13. And my wife says, why 13? And you know, I said it comes after 12.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sir, I got a great picture of you in somebody's backyard after you got home from 13 hoisting some gold ones. I was wondering if you could talk about the camaraderie and esprit de corps in the astronaut office, and maybe how that compared with your Navy experience.
He said he has a great picture of you in the backyard of somebody's house after you came back. And could you talk about the camaraderie among the astronauts and the esprit de corps that and contrast it to the Navy, perhaps?
Yeah. Well, actually, between Air Force and we had a Marine or two, and
He needs at least one.
but there was great camaraderie. There was a little bit of rivalry. Naturally, everybody wanted to be the first one to go to the moon. Naturally, but actually, it all sort of just fell out naturally. You made a flight, and then you were back up to somebody, and then later on you got assigned to another flight, and then a backup, and that's the way it really happened. And of course, I was disappointed when I didn't land on the moon on Apollo 13. I mean, I spent my life doing my last flight. I announced that it was going to be my last flight, and so then about 5 or 6 years later than that, after we started writing the book, I realized that even though 13 was a failure, and the spacecraft itself was exiled to France for many, many years, it was in some other respects a triumph. And I mentioned that in my speech, the fact that, NASA, Mission Control, and those people could bring us back home safely.
That last comment was a shot at the museum, I think, right? No. Okay, taken. Go ahead. Could you hear that?
I couldn't hear that
We
one.
haven't
I'm
any
sorry.
idea what you said. Yeah, he said that the word was out that if something went wrong on your flight with 11 and 12, that they would get a chance to refly later. Was that deal pertained to 13?
The first 2 flights, NASA was very, very careful about, and they said confidentially to the crews, look, don't take any chances. If there's something that doesn't look right, then we'll bring you back. They didn't say that to Apollo 13. And after the flight, when we got back, the first thing that we really did was to have a press conference. And of course, a lot of the press people were there, and the families came over there. And the first question, besides that, they said you'll get the very next flight on Apollo 11 or 12. That was the whole thing. Don't take a chance, we'll give you the very next flight. And so the first question that was asked by a reporter, Captain Lovell, do you plan on asking for another flight? And the management was right behind me, and for a brief second, I had a beautiful shot saying, why, yes, this is a natural thing, And then I looked out in the audience, and there's a hand went up and went like this. It was my wife.
Okay, it's right here.
So, you quoted the last line from Apollo 13. I've always wondered this. Did you write it? And what other parts of the movie did you actually write, or how accurate is the dialogue?
You said you quoted the statement from the last line in Apollo 13, and did you write it? And what was the second half of that? What other parts did you write?
The last lines on Apollo 13 that you saw in the movie were actually ad-libbed by Tom Hanks. Wow. Yeah, he made that. The ending had changed somewhat. I think the original ending had us back in the back of the house, you know, thinking about not getting to the moon and all that, but that didn't work out too well, and that was the last scene.
Okay, what is it?
Could you recall your emotions from all of your space missions and the events that happened? Like, doing that?
You got a minute? Could you recall all of your emotions from all of your space experiences?
Well, I could simplify them. I was happy, I was mad, I was frightful, I was surprised. You know, all these things during my history of flying, all these things occurred to me. I was disappointed. You know, you go the gamut of emotions, just like you do in life in general.
Okay. Yes, right there.
That the movie Apollo 13 missed out on anything important that you would like to know?
What? You gotta speak up.
We can't hear you.
Do you think the movie Apollo 13 missed out on any important stories from the mission?
Was that, do you think the movie Apollo 13 was accurate?
Was there anything missing?
Pardon?
Was there anything missing?
Okay, was there anything missing from the movie
Oh.
Apollo 13?
Well, actually, first of all, let me say the movie was very accurate for those who might contend. And my wife actually did lose her wedding ring down the drain the night before the thing, and that wasn't fake. There was a lot of things, of course, missing. When they did the movie, it turned out to be over 3 hours long when they did all the filming, and Universal said, there's no way we're going to have a 3-hour movie. You find out that most of the money made by the movie houses are on popcorn and Coke, so you got to turn the audience over 5 times. So the movie came down to 2 hours and 20 minutes. But all the major incidents were true. The only thing that was not true in the entire movie was the argument in the lunar module between Fred Hayes, Jack Swigert, and myself, when Hayes said to Swigert that, hey, you threw the switch, you know, and Swigert said, I didn't throw the switch. And they went back and forth, you know, and finally I said, you know, hey, you know, if I was there, I'd throw the switch. That was not true. And we saw the screenplay and we called up. In fact, the actors, when they looked at it, said, you know, it's not in the air-to-ground transcripts. In fact, we sent the air-to-ground transcripts to Ron Howard, the director, because the first draft of the movie was awful, absolutely awful. So Ron Howard said, look, I can't show anxiety. I can't show suspense, fatigue, by just showing some guy's face with perspiration coming down. I have to have an oral confrontation. And so they said, okay, we'll throw it in. And that's the reason why that was in. There was some artistic license taken on both Swigert and T.K. Manley. Jack Swigert, having honestly not trained for a couple months after in the backup helping us, it looked like in the movie that he had to earn his wings every day. Actually, Swigert was a very competent astronaut. As a matter of fact, he helped write the malfunction procedures of the command module. So if I needed a backup, he was the guy I wanted. And the last part with Ken Manley, it looked to me, or looked like Ken Manley, you know, went in there and figured out exactly how to reverse the power to power back up the batteries in the command module. He was one of them, but not all of them. It was really a team of about 4 good engineers who did that job.
Jim, we want to thank you for a truly memorable evening. This has been just wonderful. Just a little remark. Just stay right there. Captain Lovell will be available in the Milestones of Flight Hall to sign his book, and that'll be the only thing he will be signing tonight, so to try to keep the line moving. If, and by the way, in case you're wondering why we're working so hard to get the question right, is because we're webcasting these events, and the people out there in the television land can't hear what's going on from the question side. So it's, and also for the documentation that we have in our archives when you want to call this show up in the future. If you would exit through the rear of the theater, we'll see you down in Milestones. Thank you.